halfpenny jizz Aliens franchise door.
A disaster.
I am an insufferable leftist. Right, before we get into the video, please be aware that it will contain spoilers for Alien 3, as well as references to other movies in the franchise. Alien 3 is the much maligned sequel to Alien and Aliens, and was among the first to introduce us to the horrors of terrible CGI. I mean, we went from this to this. Now, I mentioned in my previous Alien franchise video, my 3 problems with Alien vs Predator, that I didn't want to open my thoughts on the Aliens franchise door, and that goes for here too. That is a different and probably much longer video, but it's important to acknowledge the background to this film, given its huge change in tone, scale, and frankly, its quality. Given the success of the franchise up to this point, putting the sequel in the hands of a young David Fincher, who up to that point had mostly made their name by making music videos, was an interesting risk to take. Clearly, they saw something in the man that later brought us Seven, Fight Club, and The Social Network. But Fincher's legendary battles with the producers of this film definitely made their way into the fabric of the movie. Whether it be in the sometimes shoddy and rushed effects, the strange pacing of the theatre release, or in the way that Fincher talks of the film even now, if he does at all.
My first movie, it's fairly well known, was a disaster.
I recently watched Alien 3's Assembly Cut, which is considered by most to be the best version of the film, which puts back a bunch of extra scenes that help add a bit of colour and interest to the film, and honestly, how it was ever released without some of these scenes is truly mind-boggling. I will put a link to a Den of Geek article that contains the details and the differences between the theatrical cut and the assembly cut in the sources section of the description. The theatrical version is available on Disney Plus in the UK at the moment if you want to see an edit that wears every single conflict, mistake, misfortune and tiredness on its sleeve. Anyway, as returning viewers will know, I am an insufferable leftist. I can't watch anything, and this goes double for sci-fi, without interrogating the politics of the movie or show, particularly when the director has some weak political opinions. I wanted to share my big 3 problems with Alien 3, both in terms of the logic within the film and what it says about the world we live in. And I'm interested to see what you all make of my thoughts, so do let me know in the comments, but keep it nice and friendly though, eh? As with my AVP video, we will be dealing only with this movie's content, not any expanded universe stuff, so no other movies, books, comics or games. Inevitably, there may be some things I query that are answered in other media, and I do look forward to you filling me in on the answers in the comments. So the setting for Alien 3 is the planet Fury 161, which we later learn was colonised by everyone's favourite corporate monsters, Weyland-Yutani, and which saw them set up a series of industrial facilities based on mineral extraction and processing. But of course, because the alien universe charts a course for humanity that basically continues the mind-numbing neoliberalism and outsourcing of current times, the facilities are staffed by prisoners, because of course they are. At the timing of the movie, Fury 161 is a largely uninhabited planet with most of its facilities shut down and derelict, and nearly all of its previous 5,000 convicts and staff shuffled off to what one imagines were more profitable ventures, leaving the inhospitable and chaotic climate behind and a small group to manage the few working elements left in the facility.
This used to be a 5,000 convict facility. Well, it's been reduced to a custodial staff of 25.
Why?
The pilot light on.
Weyland-Yutani, as a profit-driven corporation, will be looking for the highest possible profit margin, which typically means the lowest possible labour costs. Now, we know that in real life, prisoners in the US are used as a low-cost labour force, with prisoners earning on average 13 to 52 cents an hour, according to an article from the American Civil Liberties Union, with some states not paying their prisoners at all. So we can safely assume that Weyland-Yutani are paying a very small amount, if anything at all, to each prisoner. Furthermore, because the prisoners are housed as well, we can also assume that the prison element itself is a private enterprise, with whatever state that penalised these people likely paying Weyland-Yutani for their care. Whether by fortune or planning, Fury 161 is both remote in terms of its planetary location and has a very harsh and cold climate that makes the prospects for any prisoner that managed to escape the facility very bleak indeed. This allows Weyland-Yutani to dial back on its paid staff, since armed guards aren't needed when there is nowhere to escape to.
There's no way to escape.
This is a maximum security prison. And you have no weapons of any kind.
But what was to stop the prisoners storming the guards and taking over, you ask? Thank you. Well, due to the barren nature of the planet's surface and the lack of naturally occurring foods, waters and medicines, the facility relies on a 6-monthly supply delivery from Weyland-Yutani. And if they were not to receive the coded confirmation from the facility when on approach, they would simply skip the drop-off and leave the prisoners to starve. All of this means that even when at the full capacity of 5,000 convicts, there was a skeleton staff of paid guards, with no weapons and no real means for discipline, beyond the threat of withholding food, water, medical treatment, and what little probably passed for entertainment. It is hard to see how anything good can come from allowing corporations to manage dangerous prisoners in the cheapest way possible. Bad news then, friends, that 8% of the US prison population and 14% of the UK prison population already exist under private control, overseen in the UK by non-problematic and famously competent outsourcing companies like G4S, Serco and Sodexo. But I am sure they have both the public and the prisoners' best interests at heart, just like Weyland-Yutani.
Why did you get her out of the infirmary? This absolutely perfect. What happens when we've done such a big is walked around hard on?
We discover early on in the movie that this planet does at least have one plentiful resource, that being huge, gross-looking lice. Given everything else, I'm surprised that Weyland-Yutani don't have the prisoners eating them, though actually I shouldn't say that, as it might give G4S ideas.
You really ought to shave my head. Problem with lice.
Anyway, at some point Weyland-Yutani decide that the materials on the planet are no longer profitable enough, and they decide to shutter the foundries, mines and facilities on Fury 161, leaving behind only a small group of caretakers to maintain the core facilities, those being 2 staff and 25 prisoners. Just like that, a 5,000 strong convict facility is shut down and abandoned. Given the poor conditions, the minimal comforts, the unrewarded work and the general lack of care beyond their value as labour, it's hard to see the benefits of profit-driven prisons beyond those that are getting paid to both house and exploit them.
That's right, let me see.
See these closed-circuit monitors everywhere. We can try to find it out.
The video system hasn't worked in years. Nothing much works here. A lot of technology, no way to fix it. Don't call me that.
No climate control, no video system, no surveillance, no freezers, no ice cream, no rubbers, no women, no guns. All we got here is shit.
But at least they will do their time and then emerge rehabilitated, right? Well, if your prison is being run for profit, where you are paid for the incarceration of each prisoner, and where you earn money from the labour of that same prisoner, I mean, what exactly is the incentive for it to rehabilitate anyone, or to release them at all for that matter? Let us consider, what does a prison gain from the release of prisoners? A state prison saves money on their upkeep, returns offenders to the labour pool of wider society, and can reinforce the social reproduction of that society's culture. A private prison, however, doesn't give a halfpenny jizz about societal well-being or the economic wealth beyond their company's accounts. What they do care about is the fact that they would have to replace money they were receiving for that prisoner and then train the replacement to reach the same skill level as the one that is left, all in the knowledge that they would need to do this again in the future. For-profit prisons are a problematic issue at best, and a glaring contradiction at worst. And the fact is that when you introduce profit into justice, you change the priorities of its institutions. What even is the point of prison? Now, before we move on to the next section, this here is your reminder that if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like. It helps get my nonsense theories out to more unsuspecting viewers, and frankly, even if you don't like it so far, wouldn't it be funny to like it anyway so that others have to suffer too? Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the video. There are generally 3 schools of thought as to the end goal for imprisonment. Number 1 being to physically remove problematic individuals from society, protecting the innocent from criminals by putting them somewhere else. 2, to enact punishment or justice upon those that offend in a way that is proportionate to their crimes, but is severe enough to act as a deterrent. And 3, to remove offenders from circumstances that led them to commit crimes and rehabilitate them, ready for reintroduction to society as a fully functioning citizen. But of course, we must acknowledge that there is a mystery fourth option: profit. Weyland-Yutani are a for-profit organisation, so we know we have to reconcile with the profit motive and the fact a corporate structure must pursue profit as its primary goal, with all other considerations an irrelevance, an expendable resource. After all, that is literally baked into corporations as their legal priority, as per my video on why we need unions, and illustrated handily by this moment from the OG Alien film. So, if you are a company that makes money from housing prisoners and exploiting those prisoners for cheap or free labour, how do those three schools of thought look? 1 and 2 work just fine, of course. Weyland-Yutani are more than happy to cram as many prisoners as they can into their facilities, to keep picking up those government payouts and then putting them to work in the foundries, mines and processing facilities. The third one, however, well, that is not an optimal option at all now, is it? Apart from the additional costs of education, treatment and development, etc., all activities incidentally that would require prisoner time that could be better utilised than some of that yummy exploited labour, there would also be the fact that such a model is ultimately built around the release of said prisoners back into society at some point. This foolishness would mean the loss of those payouts, the registering, transportation and integration of new prisoners, and then having to train up your labour force again from scratch. Outrageous. Makes you wonder how companies like G4S, Serco and Sodexo feel about being responsible for 14% of the UK's prison population, doesn't it?
Working as a guard and with a hidden camera, he filmed children being physically abused by staff. G4S, who run the centre, announced that 11 staff had been sacked or suspended.
Oh. Back on Fury 161, inside the prison we see some very basic classrooms and meeting rooms, a very sparse canteen. I don't remember seeing a games room or a library, suggesting that enrichment of prisoner lives was not a priority. We are told by prominent convict Dylan at one point that this facility is only for the worst criminals, and that in essence parole is not an option for them. So we then have to consider a topic that also came up in the AVP video, which is that of slavery. What else can you call it when you have complete control of another human being's existence and are utilising their time and skills to make yourself richer? Oh yeah, work. Seriously though, what else can you call it when someone extracts value from you when you have no choice but to obey? Shit, that's still work, isn't it? These prisoners, however reprehensible, have no future, no hope and no path back towards freedom, and are made to work in horrendous conditions to make money for a corporation that sees them as little other than extractable income. Indeed, when Ripley is talking with one of the 2 paid staff that remained at the site, the assistant Aaron, who is nicknamed 85 by the convicts.
What's this 85 thing?
A couple of us need to look at his personnel file the day he arrived. It's his IQ.
Aaron mentions that in all the time he has been on site, they have never received any communication labelled high priority, showing that even when the site was running at full capacity, it was at most a passive income stream and at worst a forgotten irrelevance to the gargantuan Interstellar Corporation's balance sheet. It is only the presence of Ripley, a very much known quantity to Weyland-Yutani, and more specifically the broadcasting of a medical scan that shows, spoiler, the queen embryo gestating within her, that perks the interest of the company. Both the staff and the prisoners that remain are considered eminently disposable, a point that the movie makes both with the appearance of the staff being so similar to the prisoners, and with staff similarly trapped on site too, and subject ultimately to the same risks and losses of liberty. Going back to the setting, 2 of the larger facility rooms we see during the course of the movie, excluding the work-related ones anyway, are the medical centre and the morgue, which are both rather large and equipped for handling large numbers of people. It is probably not surprising that a facility that is looking to extract as much labour value as possible would see the value in investing in medical care and facilities to keep the workers healthy and in a fit state to continue working. It should also be noted though that once the facility was largely shut down and the 5,000 convicts extracted, presumably to work another site, they did not leave any paid medical staff behind, relying on the convicted Dr. Clemens to provide medical care as part of his sentence. The size of the morgue, though, was interesting. Why would you need to store so many dead bodies? But then we must remember, the nearest help-off planet is at least days away, and you come to realise that injuries and deaths were not just a risk in these kinds of harsh physical work, but very much expected. And I suspect the industrial working practices were engineered towards efficiency and output as opposed to safety. As an aside, I would generally advise caution when dealing with any institution that offers you more personal space when you are dead than when you are alive. It appears that the only way off of Fury 161 is via the morgue. These men committed the most violent and barbaric of crimes. They do not shy away from telling Ripley that. But do we, as a society, think that these crimes happen completely absent the influences of addiction, abuse, poverty and trauma?
Yo, you don't want to know. I'm a murderer and rapist.
You weren't allowed.
Well, we've never had any before. We tolerated anybody. Even the intolerant. That's just a statement of principle of a person. You see, we've got a good place to wait here. We got to. No temptation.
It seems to me that to absolve society of its part in creating crime, and therefore in creating criminals, would be to entirely miss the point of justice. If our society was capable of producing these men that kill, rape and torture, it will again, and ignoring why these individuals became this way and simply shipping them off to prison is as callous to the rest of society as it is reckless. Is the Xenomorph a good guy? Now bear with me here. So far, I've explained how a for-profit industry built around convict labour can lead to a clash of interest for the company being paid to keep them, how it can lead to conflicts of interest between the imprisoned and the prison owner, and how at a certain point this exploitation simply becomes an act of slavery. I have then talked about how a prison without the possibility of redemption, rehabilitation or even self-improvement is indicative of a state's attitude towards society, indicating a conservative understanding of crime that relies on the idea that criminals are in some way internally defective, thereby absolving society of any of the blame and robbing it of the need for self-examination. If we were to accept the prison as presented in Alien 3 and maintain the belief that it is morally acceptable, then we are left with only one option. The convicts of Fury 161 must be genuinely, completely, and innately evil. That is the only way to justify their treatment, the moral acceptance of the situation, and the prisoner's own resignation to their fate. They have certainly committed some evil acts, there's no denying that. But this is an important distinction from describing someone as simply violent, for example. Or to phrase it slightly differently, someone who chooses violence as their method of influencing the world around them.
The model pummeled the doll with the mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down and beat it.
Violence and aggression can be learned behaviours, for example, a defence mechanism developed as a result of addiction, abuse or trauma. An aggressive person may be someone who has experienced great hurt. Can we call a victim who turns bully evil? Not for me. There is a cause and effect. Behaviours being influenced. The behaviour was not inevitable, but is some combination of, yes, your nature to some degree, but more importantly of the world and people around you. For me, an evil person has to have chosen violence, murder and spite as a free choice beyond trauma, beyond learned behaviours and beyond cause and effect. It has to be because they are in some way fundamentally wrong. This logic has been internalised by the remaining prisoners of Fury 161, wrapping itself in the vestments of a pseudo-religion that preaches an acceptance of suffering and that there will be no redemption in this life.
We commit this child and this man to your keeping, O Lord. Their bodies have been taken from the shadow of far light. They have been released from all darkness and pain.
Indeed, the prisoners that choose to stay behind as caretakers after the main site was closed by Weyland-Yutani did so at least partially because they believed that a hard and barren life left behind on a frozen wasteland of a planet was a fitting purgatory for them. They did not believe they could become better. They believed they were irrevocably and rightfully damned.
We're all gonna die. The only question is when. This is as good a place as any to take your first steps to heaven. The only question is how you check out.
Incidentally, it is not made clear whether the religion has sprung up from within the prisoners or was cleverly embedded amongst the prison population by Weyland-Yutani as a method for pacification. But it certainly suits the prison staff, as it enforces a behavioural code of conduct and polices the prisoners on their behalf.
Take off. I gotta re-educate some of the brothers. We gotta discuss some matters of the spirit.
It also removes any hope or expectations of freedom, or a better standard of life even, which is also a benefit for Weyland-Yutani, reducing the likelihood of protest, riot or escape. So I am really very suspicious as to whether this was a corporate construct. It's just too convenient, isn't it? The self-loathing evidenced by the convicts reminds me a little bit of Opus Dei, the Christian zealots that sometimes practiced the mortification of the flesh, where they would inflict suffering on themselves to better understand and sympathise with the tribulations of Christ, through acts like flagellation, the whipping of one's own flesh. Much like liberals and Harry Potter, Opus Dei would massively benefit from reading a different book. Now, I'm guessing at this point you are probably wondering, when are you going to get to talking about the Xenomorph, you pompous windbag? And well, I think we can start doing that here.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
We have talked about how the prisoners have adopted this religion and their behavioural standards all around the idea that they are effectively damned, and as such, are irredeemable in this life, destined to work in isolation until they can't anymore. We have discussed that the only way to justify to ourselves, as a society, the forsaking of prisoners into a situation with no hope and no freedom is if we believe that they are, in essence, evil. And then, the character Golic says this.
These are minds. Nobody can stop it. It got slaughtered like this. It wasn't me.
Aha, a dragon is it? Obviously, my mind filled with biblical references galore, serpents, dragons, Satan, Leviathan, and the whole shaboodle, such as this from Revelations. This great dragon, this ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all his angels. However, I don't think we should think of the Xenomorph as a demon or an agent of the devil. Quite the opposite, in fact. Golic is, after all, an especially troubled individual, even before encountering the Xenomorph and seeing it kill his comrade. His view of the world is not a reliable one, so when he says devil, we should consider his perspective as skewed.
This man's a convicted multiple murderer and all particularly brutal crimes. Isn't that right, Mr. Dillon?
Yeah. That part's right.
What we can perhaps see instead, in the framing of the Xenomorph as some potentially biblical terror, is instead an avatar for final judgment. The vicious embodiment of Old Testament-style justice that the members of this cult have been subconsciously waiting for, to offer them the early release that their belief system will allow. This avenging angel swoops down onto Fury 161 to deliver a form of final justice to the rapers, the murderers, and as far as this prison seems to believe, the irredeemably evil.
It's only in the face of horror that you truly find your noblest self. So, I'll bring you pain. I'll bring you horror. So that you may rise above it.
Even the name of the planet, Fury, harkens back to the Greek deities of vengeance, the Furies. Is that what this is then? Is the Xenomorph just another form of God's thirst for retribution? Maybe that is a stretch too far. But what is YouTube for if not wild speculation? It is perhaps telling that of all the deaths in Alien 3, the only 3 characters not killed by the Xenomorph are Ripley, our protagonist, playing the part of Mary, the pregnant mother of God, that being the Queen Alien embryo, Aaron, the assistant, who despite his shortcomings generally tries to help in his own way, and Morse, a cynical and leery prisoner who helps Ripley escape capture by Weyland-Yutani at the end. Of these 3, Ripley and Aaron are innocents to at least a relative degree, and it is of course Morse that thinks of using the sprinklers to kill the Xenomorph. Is the Xenomorph of Alien 3 the violent representation of God's fiery wrath, sent to cleanse Fury 161 of sin. Not literally, no. I do wonder if one version of the many scripts thrown at this film was built around an Old Testament style vision of divine justice, self-sacrifice and spiritual redemption, as personified by Dylan's death, where he chooses to use his life to distract the Xenomorph long enough for the others to kill it. Or indeed, Ripley's choice to sacrifice herself to destroy the Xenomorph Queen before it can be exploited by Weyland-Yutani. And I mean, I know we're trying not to look beyond this film, but Ripley does do the whole resurrection thing too. Anyway, we have our sinners, the prisoners. We have our angel, the Xenomorph. Where is the big bad in this silly theory of mine? Where is Lucifer, the devil, big old bad of the Old Testament? Well, that's easy. That's Weyland-Yutani. They created the circle of exploitation via their private prisons. They measure the worth of life in currency. They clearly have massive influence over the running of whatever state institutions remain active in this setting. And they literally own the planet on which all of this happens. An inhospitable planet that only those considered utterly without virtue, with no hope of redemption, and in desperate need of punishment would ever entertain as a home. Sounds a lot like hell, doesn't it? Weyland-Yutani arrive at the prison. They wear the face of a former friend, Bishop, to try and manipulate Ripley. They shoot Morse, they kill Aaron, and they attempt to capture the Xenomorph for their own ends.
Ripley, think of all we could learn from it. It's the chance of a lifetime. You must let me have it.
As a lefty, I don't need much to convince me of corporations being the devil, but to quote Ripley, here discussing the relative morality of Xenomorph versus corporate greed in Aliens,
"You know, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them each other over for a goddamn percentage."
So there you have it. The Xenomorph is an avenging angel delivering vengeance to the forsaken souls of a planet that is equal parts natural hellscape and man-made lakes of liquid fire, owned and run by a devilish corporation that seeks to capture a god as they are being born. Alright, it's a stretch, but hey, that sounds like a hell of a movie, doesn't it? So, before we go any further, we need to establish one key thing. This is a tongue-in-cheek video. I'm having some fun with these themes in order to make some more serious points. If we are to accept that it is morally okay to use prisoners as slave labour, and not only that, but slave labour that works not for societal benefit but instead for private profit, then we must conclude that they have moved beyond some imagined line where redemption may have been possible. If we treat prison, as the movie does, not as a place where we can have those that have fallen beneath societal standards developed into solid citizens, but rather as a dead end where we put all of those that we have failed in some way, we have to morally and psychologically file those people in a different way to ourselves. If we do something wrong, it was a mistake, or an error in judgment, or at worst, we gave in to temptation. We are passive in our wrongdoing, and in that way we are redeemable. But if we do not apply those same graces to others, rather than mistakes, they chose to do wrong. Rather than error in judgment, they chose to risk punishment. And rather than being tempted into crime by material circumstance, they chose the easy option. They must be different to you or I. Otherwise, how can we live with ourselves knowing that some people are being punished for being born poor, for being abused, for being exploited, for being desperate, for being traumatized? The prisoners of Fury 161 must be evil, as must prisoners up and down the UK and beyond. Otherwise, what does that make us? Thank you for watching this video. It was a hell of a ride to write. I had a very different idea in mind when I started. The good and evil stuff all came about much later, as I thought more and more about what prisons and the growing relationship with profit might mean for our relationship to those we put in them. The Xenomorph once again offers a compelling argument against them being the baddie. Instead, acting more like a fish out of water, we have no queen hive mind to guide them, and a bunch of tasty looking creatures running around and bothering it for some reason. The real bad guys, as per every Scooby-Doo cartoon, many episodes of Elementary and every volume of the Hellblazer graphic novels, are of course the corporations, the wealthy and the powerful, and I will continue to make videos saying the real bad guy is capitalism until we either get universal basic services or until the poles melt and I become a mer person. Thanks again for watching. Give this video a like if you've enjoyed it, subscribe for more content, and be good to each other out there. See you soon. Bye.